from the depths of hell comes the maddest muscle car to ever come out of Detroit. A car designed for one ultimate purpose: the fastest quarter mile of any production car ever made. This is the Dodge Demon. However, since talking about the Demon wouldn't be that long of an episode, I'm broadening this out to all factory spec dragsters, because believe it or not, it isn't the only one. No. To find that out, we have to dig all the way back to 1957, where at an NHRA drag race, people noticed that there were a lot of Detroit engineers looking at the cars, examining them, seeing what they could learn, and they were a little confused. But by 1961, Detroit was building factory spec drag cars in the hush-hush. They weren't on showroom floors. You had to know a guy to be able to get them. They were completely maxed out muscle cars, based off of factory road cars, built for the new NHRA factory experimental class. And the first car of this type was the 1961 Plymouth Catalina Super Duty. You've probably never heard of this car. In fact, neither did I until I did this research. It has a 6.8 liter naturally aspirated V8 and a chassis that's been Swiss cheesed the hell out of it and dropped the weight by 150 pounds. And, well, horsepower figures are a bit iffy, because Plymouth said it made about 390 horsepower, but people did dyno testing with it and it reached 460. That's a lot of power in 1961. And because of the lightweight and the massive power, it did 0 to 60 in a respectable 5.4 seconds and the quarter mile in under 14. In 1961, JFK just gave his speech to land on the moon, and this thing was doing sub 14 second quarter miles. And believe it or not, Detroit was just getting started on the craziness, because 1963, Chevrolet rolled out the Z11 Impala 427. This 7-liter V8 was officially rated at 425 horsepower. And if you look through the catalogs of all the other American muscle cars, the top tier ones are all listed at 425 horsepower or around that number. Why is that? Well, US insurance regulations were a bit finicky, and if your vehicle had more than 425 horsepower, it would be placed in a higher insurance bracket. So, Detroit just decided, we're not gonna label our cars more than 425 horsepower. Which means the Impala was making 425 horsepower, but in reality it was pushing 500. And thanks to its 300-pound diet, it could do the quarter mile in the low 11 seconds. 11-second quarter miles in 1963. That's mental. And Dodge quickly followed suit, not wanting to get left out, in 1964 with the Dodge Dart Super Stock. They took their NASCAR engine from the Daytona. Not the winged one, the car they used in NASCAR. Anyway, this 426 cubic inch naturally aspirated V8 made 425, no, sorry. I meant 600 horsepower. 600 horsepower. 0 to 60 was dropped down to 4.1 seconds, and a quarter mile of 11.4. However, despite Plymouth's and Chevy's and Dodge's best efforts, it would be Ford that would take the crown for the most mental vehicle ever to come out of 60s America. The Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. This limited run Fairlane 500 used the high-rise 7-liter V8 from their racing programs. And believe me, this was about as mental as you could get. It was technically a road car, but it pushed that to the absolute limit, even to the point where Ford was saying you would be an idiot to drive this car on the road. Because it was using lightweight fiberglass panels, plexiglass windows. Hell, they even used fiberglass bumpers until they were outlawed, which had the same crash rigidity as paper mache. And naturally, this ultra-lightweight, stripped-out monster couldn't be made on an assembly line, so it was handmade in association with Dearborn steel tubing. And let's go back to that engine for a second. You see, it had a compression ratio in 1964 of 13.5 to 1, which means this naturally aspirated engine made 550 horsepower in a vehicle weighing less than 3,300 pounds. I mean, that is an absurd power-to-weight ratio for the era. Because these were not, the most sophisticated cars. They were still using steel chassis on many of them. And it weighed less than 3,300 pounds with 550 horsepower. Now, yes, all of these cars handled like barges. But that wasn't their point. Their point was to go stupid fast. And damn the consequences. This is an actual quote put on the actual glove box by riveted steel plates, okay? This vehicle has been built as a lightweight competitive car and includes certain fiberglass and aluminum components. Because of the specialized purpose for which this vehicle has been built, and in order to achieve maximum weight reduction, normal quality standards of Ford Motor Company in terms of panel fit and exterior look are not met with this car. That tells you how beastly this car is. And, well, considering it was lighter than anything else, almost as powerful as anything else, it ran the quarter mile in 1964 of 10.3 seconds. 10.3! That is 3/100ths of a second faster than a Lamborghini Aventador SV. And with modern day tires, the drag slicks, it can do 9 seconds flat. In 1964, without a turbocharger in sight. And how much did all this excellence cost? Well, as you're making your guesses now, I should inform you, they only made 100 of them. And they sold them in 1964 at a price of $3,900, or, adjusted for inflation, $32,000. So, if I was buying it today, I could have a slightly upgraded Ford Fusion, or a 10-second car. That is quite possibly the greatest value for money anyone has ever said, and you cannot change my mind otherwise. And then, road legal dragsters kind of died off. The art of making your car as light as possible, as powerful as possible, regardless of safety or consequences, kind of went away by the 60s. I mean, there were very fast cars in the core mount, do not get me wrong, but they weren't exactly the Thunderbolts or the Z11s as the way once were. And then combine that with the gas crisis in the 70s, and no one was making high-powered muscle cars at all anymore. So you'd have to wait until 1987 with Buick, of all people, to make us the next dragster. And this was an interesting one. You see, they won the Grand National Championship in NASCAR twice. So they capitalized off of that. And they took their Regal, partnered up with ASC McLaren, and made the Regal Grand National Experimental. 547 of them were ever made. They were 276 horsepower, 360 foot-pound of torque rocket ships. However, those numbers seemed a bit off. You see, as people were testing it, bone stock, they realized it could do the quarter mile in 12.7 seconds and the 0 to 60 of 4.5. And they found that quite odd because the Ferrari F40, the fastest car in the world at the time, did the quarter mile in 13 seconds flat, which is slower than the Buick. And the only vehicle faster than the Buick to 60 was the Lamborghini Countach. So people started doing dyno testing with it, and it actually made 300 horsepower, 420 foot-pounds of torque. Why did they detune it, underrate it so much? Because GM had already killed off the Regal by 1987. They're not going to make them anymore. And they wanted to make sure that the ultimate Regal wasn't better than the Corvette. So, yeah. And now we don't have another dragster. We would have to wait until 1990 to get another one. And it was a weird one. More weird than Buick, I would argue. Because it was from GMC. With the Cyclone. Yes, a pickup truck. This pickup truck with four-wheel drive, a 280 horsepower, 350 foot-pound of torque, 4.3 liter V6, was the fastest accelerating car in the world. It could do the quarter mile in under 13 seconds, just like the Buick. And a car and driver did a drag racing test between the Cyclone and the Ferrari 348, which cost 5 times as much. And the Cyclone won. Yeah. And they made a sister car to it called the Typhoon, which was an SUV, which was just as fast. What is it with GM off-brands making mental vehicles? Which finally brings us on to the Dodge Challenger Demon. Quite possibly one of the best names ever in the auto industry, I will add. And they needed a properly suitable level of performance for such a suitable name. This monster made 840 horsepower, 770 torque from a 6.7 liter supercharged V8. And by the way, that supercharger is a mind-melding 2.7 liters in displacement. That's bigger than most engines sold in Europe, with the exception of Ferrari, Lamborghini, Jaguar, and Aston. That's stupid. Now, the original Hellcat was quite a heavy car, almost 4,500 pounds. So, they put it on a diet. You see, they took it to the extreme to save 216 pounds out of that car. They made the rear brakes smaller to save 16 pounds. They made the anti-roll bars and the sway bars hollow to save 25 pounds. And the passenger seat was removed. Yeah, the passenger seat. It only comes with one seat to save 57 pounds. Although you can opt the passenger seat back in for $1. Because they can't give it to you for free, so they charge $1. Now, despite all of this weight reduction, it's still a hefty 4,300 libs. But despite that massive weight and the rear-wheel drive system, it is rather quick. It does 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds and has a Guinness World Record for the fastest production car in the quarter mile at 9.65 seconds. And that 0 to 60 time is the fastest rear-wheel drive car ever to 60, being only by the Porsche 918 with 2.2. It generates 1.6 G in acceleration forces. That's neck-snapping territory. And let's just say the word first or world record was invented for the Demon. For instance, it was the first production car to do a wheelie at 2.9 feet of wheeling at one point. It's also got the largest hood scoop ever fitted to a production car. It's also the first production car to use a transaxle and line lock. And it's the first production car to have an optional skinny tires, the bicycle tires as they are referred to, for $1. There's a common theme here. It is also the first production car to use factory spec road legal drag tires. It is also the first factory spec car to use 100 octane fuel as an option. It's just world first after world first after world first. And that quarter mile record stood for a whopping 15 minutes. Because Hennessy and the tuning guys that made the Venom, yeah, they wanted to beat the Demon. So how do you get rid of a demon? You vanquish it with an exorcist. So, Hennessy took a regular Camaro ZL1 with 650 horsepower, mind you, and they gave it a $55,000 upgrade package with a 2.9 liter capacity supercharger on it to make 1,000 horsepower from a supercharged V8. That means a 0 to 60 time of 2.1 seconds and the standing quarter mile in an absolutely eyeball-watering 9.57 seconds with a top speed of 217 miles an hour. And while you're thinking, well, that sounds absolutely terrifying, you would be right, but it's even more terrifying than you would think, because you see, while it may cost $55,000, Hennessy has decided to keep everything but the engine and the gearbox stock. So it has stock tire widths, stock brakes, stock suspension, just power. So it does its job very well in the straight line, and then you come to a corner, and then you meet the Exorcist, and die. Yeah, none of these cars I've talked about so far are particularly good handling, but this one seems exceptionally like it's trying to kill you. So, what is the future for production drag cars? Well, recently we have seen a bit of a resurgence in them. Obviously with the Demon and the Exorcist, and with these crazy horsepower figures and electric cars are producing 2,000 horsepower for the new Owl Allspark thingy. And it's probably going to be electric. Hell, Chevrolet already made an electric Copo Camaro, but that was not, of course, production. So, we'll have to wait and see. Currently, both the 0 to 60 time and the quarter mile time are held by gasoline-powered vehicles, but with the rise of electric cars, that record may not stand for as long as us petrol heads are hoping for. But we cannot deny the evolution of technology has come a long way since production drag racing began in 1957. And although the cars are not as legendary as the 1964 versions, you can't deny their sheer raw power.